Chapter 61 Sudden Stomachache. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Okay, got it, Li Xianqing said, his voice full of excitement. Bai Ruozhu perked up her ears, noting that Li Xianqing addressed this person respectfully as I'm here. This implied the man was also an official, and outranked Li Xianqing, commanding his respect. As Bai Ruozhu tried to figure out who her rescuer was, the county official, Li Xianqing, turned and spotted her. Well, if it isn't Bai Xindi's sister, he exclaimed, surprised. Then, turning to Lin Ping'er, he asked, and this must be Bai Xindi's mother-in-law, Mrs. Bai. Bai Ruozhu quickly curtsied to Li Xianqing, then introduced him to her mother. Mom, this is Mr. Li, our county's upright official. Lin Ping'er bowed respectfully to County Magistrate Li. I'm honored to meet you, Mr. Li. Thank you for helping to right my daughter's wrongs. Mr. Li chuckled, his eyes showing admiration. He thought to himself that the Bai family was truly one of scholars and farmers, as the womenfolk behaved impeccably, even in unexpected encounters. Lin Ping'er noticed Mr. Li's approval and felt a surge of pride, realizing it was all thanks to her scholarly father-in-law. She'd chafed under the Bai family's rules during her first year of marriage, even resenting the old man's insistence on proper etiquette, but now, she and her daughter were facing an official with grace and dignity, bringing honor to the family and themselves. Even if her son Erlang became an official one day, they wouldn't embarrass him. For the first time, Lin Ping'er appreciated the old man's insistence on propriety. Bai Ruozhu greeted Mr. Li, then turned to the masked man and gave a respectful bow. Sir, I, a humble woman, thank you for saving my life. She bowed deeply. It was awkward to bow with her pregnant belly, but she wasn't just going through the motions. She was genuinely grateful. If he hadn't appeared suddenly, she might have been in serious trouble. The memory of the trafficker's cruel eyes made Bai Ruozhu shudder. No need for thanks. I just happened to be passing by. But from now on, take it easy. It's not every day you see someone showing off with a big belly, Zhang Yichuan said coolly from behind his mask. Bai Ruozhu took a deep breath, her face burning. This man was so cutting. Of course, she knew she'd been reckless, but did he have to say it so bluntly in front of everyone? And in such an unpleasant way. It made her regret thinking he was a good person. The gratitude she'd felt for Zhang Yichuan evaporated, and his already questionable image plummeted from positive to negative. Before Bai Ruozhu could respond, she heard a woman's cry as someone rushed toward them. Ronger, my Ronger. The woman cried, apparently the kidnapped girl's mother. Sure enough, as the rescued child emerged, the woman wailed, Mommy, Ronger was so scared. Behind the woman, a man, likely a merchant, hurried forward. He knelt before Mr. Li. I, Zhang Liliang, thank you for saving my daughter. I kowtow to you. Mr. Li quickly helped Zhang Liliang to his feet. There's no need for that. The one you should really thank is Mrs. Bai, who risked her own life to call for help for your daughter, and this. He was about to introduce the masked man, Zhang Yichuan, but stopped abruptly when he heard him scoff. He mentally chastised himself for being careless. Zhang Yichuan's identity was not public knowledge. The mask was a clear indication. He had only learned Zhang Yichuan's true identity by accident and had reaped considerable benefits from it. Ronger's parents immediately knelt to kowtow to Bai Ruozhu. Uncomfortable with the gesture, Bai Ruozhu urged them to rise, but they refused. As Bai Ruozhu went to help Ronger's mother up, she suddenly paused, clutching her stomach with a pained expression. Lin Ping'er reacted instantly, supporting her daughter. Ruozhu, what's wrong? Does your stomach hurt? She asked anxiously. Bai Ruozhu frowned, trying to appear fine, but her face betrayed her. Her mother's words drew everyone's attention, making it even harder to pretend. In truth, she was experiencing stomach pain, likely due to the earlier fright and her annoyance with Zhang Yichuan. It felt like false labor, her stomach tightening painfully. Oh dear, isn't she about to give birth? Ronger's mother exclaimed. Mr. Li immediately interjected, get Mrs. Bai to Fuzhou Hall to see the doctor at once. We can't delay this. He sent an official to accompany them. Lin Ping'er thanked Mr. Li profusely, abandoning all formalities. She helped Bai Ruozhu walk towards the clinic. "Mom, I'm fine. I'm not in labor." "I was just startled," Bai Ruozhu reassured her mother, but her words were ignored. Supporting her daughter, Lin Ping'er said, "Don't talk. No matter what, we have to get you checked by Dr. Lu. Why would you suddenly hurt like that for no reason? Pain is never a good sign." False labor wasn't ideal, but with rest and care, it would pass. Bai Ruozhu, being a medical student, knew how to manage it, but she knew her words would be unconvincing right now. As Bai Ruozhu and her mother walked away, the Zhangs finally regained their composure. The wife wiped her tears. "Mrs. Bai is a good person. She almost got herself into trouble saving my Ronger. We can never forget this kindness." Zhang Liliang nodded emphatically. "Yes, never." Jiang Yichuan watched Bai Ruozhu's retreating figure, puzzled by her lack of nervousness. She seemed confident she was fine. Could she be studying medicine? Bai Ruozhu was helped into Fusho Hall. Dr. Lu Baishuang frowned upon seeing her. "I just praised you for having such a smooth pregnancy. Why are you back so soon? Are you being careless?" she said with a displeased look. Worried about upsetting Dr. Lu, Lin Ping'er said apologetically, "Dr. Lu, please don't be angry. It's my daughter's fault for not being careful. She's having stomach pains now. Please take a look at her." "Thank you." Lu Baishuang looked up at the official who had accompanied them, then turned back to the women. "What happened?" The official, a clever man, explained that he was sent by Mr. Li and recounted the story of Bai Ruozhu rescuing the kidnapped child. He was a skilled speaker, and his vivid account made Bai Ruozhu feel that her reputation had soared. Lu Baishuang made no comment but began acupuncture with silver needles. After only a few needles, Bai Ruozhu felt the false contractions subside. Chapter 62. The whole family criticizes. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Bai Ruozhu, being a Chinese medicine practitioner and trained in acupuncture since childhood, immediately recognized Lu Baishuang's skill and trusted her to proceed. "Is everything okay?" Lin Ping'er asked anxiously, rushing forward as Lu Baishuang put away the needle. Lu Baishuang, with her typically cool demeanor, simply nodded in response. Bai Ruozhu quickly reassured her mother, "Mom, I feel much better already." "Dr. Lu is amazing." The official who tagged along breathed a sigh of relief. His boss had asked him to help, but how could he, a single man with no experience with childbirth, be of any use? Thankfully, it was just a false alarm. Lu Baishuang prescribed medication for Bai Ruozhu and advised calmly, "Be careful on your way home, and try not to get startled again." Bai Ruozhu nodded quickly. I will." She was determined to be more cautious from now on. The earlier scare had truly shaken her. Lin Ping'er reached for her purse to pay the consultation fee, but Dr. Lu had already turned to leave, saying, "No charge. Saving a child is a good deed in itself." With that, she left. Lin Ping'er was left standing there, unsure whether to insist on paying. The quick-thinking official stepped in. "Dr. Lu doesn't want payment, don't argue with her. I'll go get the donkey cart ready. I'll let you know when it's here." As he turned to go, Bai Ruozhu stopped him, pressing a handful of coins into his hand. "This is for the ride, and a little something for you to get some tea. Thank you for all your trouble today." The official's face lit up. He hadn't expected any reward for his errand, but the Bai family was proving to be quite generous. As the official trotted off happily, Lin Ping'er watched him go, a hint of reluctance still on her face. Seeing that they were alone, and Dr. Lu hadn't returned, Bai Ruozhu took her mother's arm and said, "Mom, don't worry about the money. We can earn it back. It's important to show our appreciation, so my brother won't face trouble in the future." Lin Ping'er nodded. "I understand, but it still stings a little. That money could have bought you some meat." Seeing her mother's pained expression, Bai Ruozhu laughed. "Mom, stop worrying about me. If you feed me any more meat, I'll turn into a pig. What about that fabric we bought for you? You should make yourself some new clothes. Lin Ping'er was used to being frugal. The Bai family had always struggled compared to their relatives, and after she'd married in and quickly had 2 sons, while the relatives had 2 daughters, things were difficult, not enough food or warm clothing. After all, the Bai family didn't have many strong workers. Later, after the family split up, they managed to make ends meet. However, things were tight, and Lin Ping'er hadn't bought new clothes in ages. Her daughter had recently insisted on buying new fabric for the family, but Lin Ping'er, being thrifty, felt it wasn't a holiday yet, so she'd rather wait and see. But now, her thinking shifted. Just like when they'd met that Mr. Li, people thought she was Bai Zipei's mother. Even at home, she needed to look presentable when going out. "Alright, I'll get started on the clothes when we get home," Lin Ping'er said with a smile. Seeing her mother's change of heart, Bai Ruozhu was happy. She believed that life was short and one should enjoy good food and clothes when possible. Soon, the official returned and announced, "The cart's ready. You should head home and rest. I told the driver to take it easy." Bai Ruozhu bowed to the official. "I don't know your name, but I really appreciate your help today." The official scratched his head, admitting, "Call me Wang Luji. If you ever need anything, just come to the county office and ask for me." He puffed out his chest. Amused by the official's seriousness, Bai Ruozhu replied, "Okay, thank you, Brother Wang." After Bai Ruozhu and her mother returned home, Lin Ping'er recounted the day's events to the family. Bai Ruozhu was promptly scolded by her father and brothers, leaving her feeling deflated. Okay, I understand the danger. I won't be reckless again," Bai Ruozhu apologized, her ears ringing. "I know I was wrong, you can all go back to your rooms now." Bai Ruozhu's pathetic expression softened their hearts. They realized she'd been through a lot and felt sorry for her. When Bai Ruozhu returned to her room, Bai Yihong said, worried, "Hurry up and brew that medicine for her. She looks really shaken up." Lin Ping'er patted her chest, still rattled. "That kidnapper was vicious. I was terrified. Ruozhu could have been seriously hurt. But in the end, it was a good deed, a child was saved." Bai Yihong nodded. "Our daughter has a good heart, but her benefactor is right too. Saving people is important, but not without thinking." Bai Zipei, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. He turned to Lin Ping'er and asked, "Mom, what did the man who saved my little sister look like? Did you say his name?" "He wore a black mask, he probably didn't want to be identified. I wanted to thank him and ask his name so that I could repay his kindness in the future, but he refused to tell me and didn't seem to like us asking any more questions." Lin Ping'er thought. Liao said, "I see that Mr. Li respects him very much." Bai Zipei nodded. He was probably someone sent from above to investigate the case privately, so it was not convenient for his identity to be revealed. Bai Ruozhu slept soundly, only waking up when Lin Ping'er called her to take her medicine. After sleeping enough, she felt sore all over her body. Her body was getting heavier day by day. She drank the medicinal soup, rested for a while, ate some dinner, and then enjoyed the cool air in the yard. It was already autumn, but the autumn tiger was still powerful. Bai Ruozhu hoped that the weather would be cooler when she gave birth, so as to avoid confinement. Son suffers. Early the next morning, noise erupted from the Bai household's front door. Bai Ruozhu, having woken up early, wondered what the commotion was about. She opened the courtyard door and was stunned by the sight before her. Chapter 63 The Zhang Family's Thank You Gift. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Renjie and her parents, whom they'd just met the day before, arrived. The whole family was dressed up in new clothes, looking much sharper. Zhang Liliang pushed a small cart, with Ronger sitting in the corner. Her face was clean, revealing her pretty features. She wore a red coat, looking like a little doll. Renjie's mother walked alongside, playing a gong in a small drum tied to her waist. Zhang Liliang, with a booming voice, announced as he pushed the cart, thank you all for guiding us to the Bai family. We're here to thank the Zhang family's great benefactor. Bai Ruozhu opened the door, and Zhang Liliang's family spotted her immediately. Little Ronger jumped out of the cart and ran towards Bai Ruozhu, shouting, "Sister Bai, are you feeling better?" Bai Ruozhu stared at the family, momentarily speechless. It took her a couple of seconds to realize they were praising her bravery, like a modern-day presentation of accolades. Is this a bit much? I'm fine. What brings you here? Bai Ruozhu patted Ronger's head, charmed by the little girl's pigtails. Too bad I'm having a boy. I won't get to do cute hairstyles or play dress-up with a daughter. My parents were worried and wanted to see how you were doing, Renjir said, tilting her head and looking at Bai Ruozhu's belly. Sister Bai, is there a little brother in there? Kids are supposed to be intuitive about this kind of thing. Pregnant women ask little kids all the time if it's a boy or girl. Supposedly, they're pretty accurate. Bai Ruozhu chuckled. The little girl was spot on. Probably, she replied, smiling. Hearing the commotion, the rest of the Bai family rushed over. Zhang Liliang stopped the cart at the gate. He and his wife helped Renjir down, and the three of them knelt in front of Bai Ruozhu. As a modern person, Bai Ruozhu was uncomfortable with people kneeling before her. She quickly called out to her parents, "Mom, Dad, help them up. Let's talk inside." "You can't kneel like that." Bai Yihong and Lin Pinger helped the Zhangs to their feet, while Bai Ruozhu took Renjir's hand. Renjir stood up easily, but the Zhangs resisted. Zhang Liliang said solemnly, "Our family must kowtow 3 times to our benefactor, or we'll never have peace of mind." Bai Ruozhu understood their honesty and gratitude, but the stubbornness of these people was frustrating. After a moment's thought, she said, "Really, don't kowtow. You're all older than me. I can't bear it. I asked you not to kneel yesterday, and I got a stomachache. I can't handle that again today." That stopped them. The Zhangs exchanged glances and, with the help of Bai Yihong and his wife, stood up. "Come on in, folks," Bai Yihong said, taking Zhang Liliang's hand politely. Zhang Liliang nodded quickly. Okay. He turned and bowed to the onlookers. "Thank you, neighbors, for showing us the way." Zhang Liliang, thank you all again." Many of the villagers responded warmly, saying, "You're welcome," and praised Zhang Liliang for his politeness and gratitude. Zhang Liliang thanked everyone again and pushed his cart into the Bai family's yard. "Brother Bai, I only have one child, Ronger. Even though she's a girl, she's my whole world. The other day, her mother and I were so busy that we got careless, and she was kidnapped. If it weren't for your family, I wouldn't have any peace for the rest of my life." Zhang Liliang's eyes reddened, and he looked at his daughter with obvious affection. Zhang Liliang's wife didn't speak, but she dabbed at the corners of her eyes. "Now I realize that no amount of money is as important as being together as a family," Zhang Liliang said emotionally. Bai Ruozhu nodded in agreement. In her previous life, she'd often heard about wealthy parents neglecting their kids because they were too busy with work, leaving their children without a sense of family. She'd always wondered, what's the point of earning so much money if that's the result? Fortunately, Zhang Liliang and his wife had figured it out in time. Zhang Liliang continued, "I brought these things as a token of appreciation for your good health. I don't have much else, just some groceries. Please don't turn them down, Brother Bai and his family." Bai Yihong looked at Bai Ruozhu. The gifts were for her, and it was her decision whether to accept them. Bai Ruozhu shook her head quickly. "You two work hard to make a living. I can't accept such a generous gift. If I saved people just to get presents, that would be wrong." Rong Ernyang, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Miss Bai, we know you don't expect a reward, but we have to give something, or our conscience won't let us rest. Yes, this is just a small token of our gratitude. It's not worth much. Please, don't be polite. Otherwise, we'll just dump the cart at your door." Zhang Liliang said anxiously, resorting to a desperate tactic. Seeing the Zhang's insistence, Bai Ruozhu had no choice but to agree, deciding that she would find an opportunity to give Ronger something in return later, so they wouldn't feel they had to spend so much. The Zhang's faces lit up when Bai Ruozhu nodded. At that moment, Lin Ping'er brought out tea. "Please, sit down and have a cup of tea to quench your thirst. Stay for a light meal later and try Ruozhu's cooking." The Zhangs thanked her profusely. They had left early in the morning and walked all this way, pushing the cart. They were really thirsty. They didn't hesitate to take the teacups and drink. Ronger's eyes widened, and she exclaimed, "It's so sweet and delicious." Bai Ruozhu smiled, patted Rengier's head, and said, "If you like it, I'll send some home with you later." She had made some schisandra syrup herself. It tasted sweet and sour, and she thought kids would enjoy it. "What kind of tea is this?" "It tastes amazing," Zhang Liliang said, his eyes sparkling. He traveled around for business, always looking for opportunities. Bai Ruozhu smiled. "I made the schisandra syrup myself. It's not really tea. I also made some flower tea that's good for women. Miss Bai is so thoughtful. Would it be alright if I took a look?" Zhang Liliang asked eagerly. Chapter 64. Come to your door to have a meal. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Bai Ruozhu immediately picked up on what Zhang Liliang was thinking. She smiled. "Those things aren't exactly rare around here. You can find fancier ones for sale in town. If you were really trying to turn a profit, you'd probably have a hard time." Bai Ruozhu knew from experience there was no money to be made. She figured Zhang Liliang probably knew that too and was just trying to help out her family. But she didn't want to take advantage. If the relationship was one-sided, it wouldn't last. Zhang Liliang, being a sharp guy, got her meaning right away. He chuckled, a little embarrassed. "Yeah, you're right. Didn't really think that through." "It was a nice thought," Bai Ruozhu replied, wondering how to address him. He'd called her dad brother, so should she call him uncle? But he looked maybe 30, tops. "Actually," Zhang Liliang began, rubbing his hands together, "we had another idea we wanted to run by you, Miss Bai. We weren't sure if you'd be open to it." "Oh." Bai Ruozhu thought to herself, was he still trying to find a way to help her family? "My Rengier owes you her life. Her mother and I would be honored if you'd consider becoming her godmother. That way, she'll always remember the kindness you showed her." Zhang Liliang smiled warmly. Bai Ruozhu liked Rengier a lot, she was a sweet kid. She smiled back and said, "I'd be happy to be Rengier's godmother. But let's not talk about repaying a favor. It makes it sound too formal." Ronger's family was overjoyed. Bai Yihong and his wife were happy too, seeing that the Zhangs were good people and Ronger was well behaved. They declared the lunch an impromptu ceremony for the occasion. Lin Ping'er sent Bai Ziho out to buy more food and drinks, but Zhang Liliang stopped him. "I brought plenty of both. No need to spend the extra money." Earlier, he'd only mentioned bringing groceries, seemingly as a small token of appreciation. The Bays couldn't argue, so Lin Ping'er started prepping the ingredients. Rengier's mother insisted on helping, and soon the two were chatting away, side by side. Bai Ruozhu took Rengier off to play, while Bai Yihong and Zhang Liliang struck up a conversation, getting along like old friends almost instantly. After Lin Ping'er finished with the prep work, she called Bai Ruozhu to start cooking. Rengier's mother, worried about Bai Ruozhu getting worn out, offered to pitch in. Lin Ping'er laughed and held her back. "I hate to make the girl work too hard, but truth be told, she's the best cook in the family. Nobody can stomach my cooking after tasting hers." Bai Ruozhu couldn't help but laugh. "Mom, that's an exaggeration. You cooked last night. I think my brother ate 2 bowls of rice." Lin Ping'er's skills had improved recently, so she was flattered by her daughter's compliment. Still, Bai Ruozhu's cooking was definitely on another level, especially for a special meal. As noon approached, Bai Ruozhu had put together a feast. Lin Ping'er and Renjier's mother carried the dishes to the table. Zhang Liliang took a whiff and exclaimed, "Miss Bai's cooking is top-notch. It's as good as you'd get in any fancy restaurant." Bai Ruozhu smiled modestly. "It's just home-style cooking. Can't compare to a real restaurant. But I hope you both enjoy it." "Enjoy it? My mouth's watering just from the smell." Zhang Liliang said, chuckling. Bai Yihong beamed, bursting with pride as he watched the Zhangs praise his daughter. He pulled out a bottle of his best wine and said to Zhang Liliang, "Brother, let's have a drink or two to celebrate." The house was buzzing with activity when a knock came at the door. The old lady from the Bai family's high-pitched voice called out, "Second brother, heard you have company. We've come to say hello." Bai Yihong's face fell. He glanced nervously at his wife. They couldn't hide the food this time. Word would get around, and it wouldn't look good. But if his mother saw such a spread, who knew what would happen? Bai Ruozhu sighed inwardly. The Zhangs didn't understand the dynamics of their family. While their intentions were good, praising her for saving Renjier had alerted the old house to the fact that the Zhangs had brought gifts. And they'd be expecting a share. Zhang Liliang, a seasoned businessman, immediately picked up on the change in atmosphere. He realized, those must be Brother Bai's elders, and it sounds like they're not on the best terms. Lin Ping'er snapped back to attention, smiling at the Zhangs. "That's just our matriarch. I'll go open the door. Please, make yourselves comfortable." She hurried to the door. As soon as she opened it, she was met with the old Mrs. Bai's displeased expression. "Second daughter-in-law, what took you so long? You wouldn't be trying to keep your dear old mother out, would you?" Before Lin Ping'er could respond, Wang, the eldest daughter-in-law, who was supporting Mrs. Bai, chimed in, "That's not very nice, sister-in-law. When my mother heard you were having a feast, she insisted on coming over to help." "What, aren't you going to welcome us?" Because they had guests, Lin Ping'er didn't want to argue with Wang. It would be too embarrassing for the Bai family. "Mom, sister-in-law, how could I not welcome you? Please, come in." Lin Ping'er stepped aside, leading them toward the house. Bai Ruozhu had heard everything clearly from inside and couldn't help but roll her eyes. If they were really coming to help, it would have been nice if they'd shown up earlier. And it wasn't as if she was keeping them from eating. Her family wasn't stingy. But to show up only when food was on the table? They should just admit they were there for the free meal instead of pretending to offer help. The nerve of some people. Mrs. Bai and Mrs. Wang entered the main room. Bai Yihong stood up, offering his seat to his mother, and then introduced everyone. Thankfully, the old lady was on her best behavior in front of guests, maintaining a respectable demeanor. The only giveaway was that her eyes kept darting toward the food, practically drooling. The Bais noticed her staring and, feeling increasingly awkward, hurried to get everyone seated and start the meal. "De Lang, ask Lang to come out and eat with the guests," Lin Ping'er told Bai Ziho. Bai Ziho nodded and went to fetch him. Lin Ping'er smiled apologetically at the Zhangs. "Our heir Lang is studying hard for his provincial exams this year." The Zhangs had heard around Househan village that the Bai family valued education, so they were even more impressed to hear that the second son was preparing for such an important test. Zhang Liliang gave a thumbs up. "Brother Bai, you've done a wonderful job. Your children are truly exceptional." Bai Yihong beamed with pride as he listened to the compliments about his children. But Wang couldn't resist butting in. "That's not entirely true. Everyone knows my second uncle never reads a book. Erlang is where he is today because of our old man's teaching." Chapter 65 The Ugly Behavior at the Dinner Table. You are listening at novelfull.audio. When Bai Ruozhu heard Wang's words, her face clouded over. Wang was really seizing every chance to put down the second wife and insult her father's intelligence in front of guests. Bai Ruozhu, fiercely protective of her family, wouldn't stand for that. "Aunt, with all due respect, while my brothers and I are grateful to grandfather for his early lessons, father is the one who teaches us how to live a good life. That's what guides us to be upright. Education isn't the only factor. Plenty of uneducated families in this village are good people," Bai Ruozhu said with a smile, her voice gentle, as if she were just making an innocent observation, not directly challenging her aunt. She had to maintain some respect for her elders, so she couldn't directly confront Wang in front of the guests. "Of course, father learned from grandfather too. He may not have passed the Tongxing examination like uncle, but he's not illiterate. He always tells us that grandfather taught him everything he knows," Bai Ruozhu added sweetly. Wang was trying to be clever, invoking the old man of the Bai family to undermine Bai Yihong. If Bai Ruozhu and the others rushed to defend Bai Yihong, they might accidentally undermine the old man's influence on the boys, but Bai Ruozhu didn't take the bait. She skillfully defended her father while praising the old man. It was a flawless performance. Just then, Bai Ziho called Erlang over for dinner. Both of them had clearly heard Bai Ruozhu's words and nodded in approval. Even the usually reserved Erlang looked at Bai Ruozhu with newfound respect. Mrs. Wang heard Bai Ruozhu emphasize the word Tongxing and seethed with anger. But with guests present, especially the one who brought a cartload of gifts, she bit her tongue. Zhang Liliang chimed in, "Just look at your kids and you can tell brother Bai knows his stuff. I never had any schooling. I'll definitely be looking to brother Bai for guidance." Bai Zipei glanced at Zhang Liliang. He'd been studying inside, not entertaining guests, but he'd caught wind of the earlier exchange. He was starting to like Zhang Liliang. He entered the room, greeted Mrs. Bai and the guests, and then took his seat. Mrs. Wang was still stewing. Seeing Erlang's calm expression, she remarked, "Erlang probably doesn't even notice guys like you who study all day. Your uncle doesn't care either. Will that really make you a scholar?" Lin Pinger couldn't take it anymore. She'd hoped to avoid the Wang family since they had guests, but Wang was now insulting her son. "We'll know if he passes the exam or not," she retorted. Wang was about to say more, but the old lady nudged her sharply with her elbow. Wang remembered her purpose and swallowed the rest of her words. Bai Yihong smiled apologetically at Zhang Liliang and said, "Everyone's here, so let's eat. Zhang, make yourself at home." With that, he plopped a big chopstickful of pickled pork and veggies into Zhang Liliang's bowl, the very meat Zhang Liliang had brought. The old lady saw 2 generous chunks of meat disappear and winced. There were only so many pieces of good meat on the platter, and she had been counting them. She was sure there were only 12, the old lady fumed, thinking her second son was a waste. If she didn't speak up, she wouldn't get any meat. Everyone dug in. Mrs. Bai's eyes narrowed fiercely. She tried to ignore the meat in everyone else's bowl, grabbed 3 big pieces of pork and pickles, and stuffed them into her mouth, barely chewing, for fear it would all be gone. Those still reaching for food were taken aback. Worse, she was eating so fast and making loud smacking noises. It was truly awful. Bai Ruozhu's lips twitched. Her grandmother had been married to a scholar obsessed with rules for decades. Why hadn't she learned any manners? Because of her behavior, the Zhang family were reluctant to eat too much, afraid of upsetting her. Zhang Liliang quickly finished what was in his bowl and started drinking with Bai Yihong. Ronger sat next to Bai Ruozhu, her big eyes darting to the pork and pickles, but she didn't reach for it. While the Zhangs loved their daughter, meaty dishes were rare, and Bai Ruozhu's cooking was delicious, so it was no wonder Ronger was hungry. But she was a well-behaved child and wouldn't touch the dish while her parents hadn't. Bai Ruozhu sighed and reached for a piece of meat for Rinjir, but the old lady blocked her with her chopsticks. "Ruozhu, you're about to have a baby. Don't eat greasy food. You'll get sick," the old lady said with a smile, oil and sauce smeared on her mouth. She hadn't finished chewing, and her words were slurred. Bai Ruozhu, feeling a little disgusted, withdrew her chopsticks and said, "Grandma, you go ahead." The old lady thought Bai Ruozhu didn't want any, so she happily took the piece of meat, but then Bai Ruozhu quickly grabbed another piece and dropped it into Rangier's bowl. How could Bai Ruozhu give Ronger a piece of meat that old Madame Du had touched with her chopsticks? That's why she let it go so quickly and didn't care about the old lady. Sister, I don't want it, Rangier said timidly, glancing at Mrs. Bai. Bai Ruozhu patted Rangier's head. You're still growing. You need to eat well. Eat it. Don't argue with your sister. She reached for the sausage from another dish and put it into Rangier's bowl. Rangier sniffed and sensed Bai Ruozhu's kindness. She nodded and began to eat. But the old lady was furious. Even after she'd told her not to eat, she still picked up vegetables. Wasn't she just desperate to curry favor because her family was rich? Bai Ruozhu had no idea what her grandmother was thinking, and even if she did, she'd just sneer. She winked at her mother, who also added some vegetables to Ronger's mother's bowl. Their family wouldn't let their guests go hungry just to spare the old lady's feelings. Ms. Wang didn't care about customers eating their meat. She just liked to dress up and cared about her appearance. She wasn't as alarming as the old lady, but she wore a perpetual scowl, as if the whole table owed her money, making everyone uncomfortable. Bai Ruozhu sighed, thinking the whole meal had been ruined by those two. Chapter 66 The Murder Caused by the Thank You Gift. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Bai Zipei suddenly stood up. Mom, weren't you planning to take food to Grandpa? I need to ask him something anyway, so I'll just deliver it myself now. The old lady's eyes lit up. I'll take it when I go back later. Bai Zipei remained calm. I need to ask him something, so I have to go. He then turned to Zhang Liuyang's family, offering a polite apology. I'm sorry for neglecting you all. I'll come back later to toast Uncle Zhang. Zhang Liuyang had thought Bai Zipei was just quiet, maybe a bit of a snob. But now he seemed quite polite. A future scholar being so courteous? He must just be reserved. He returned the politeness, watching Bai Zipei head to the kitchen, grab the food, and quickly leave. Bai Zipei looked thin, but he moved with surprising strength and purpose. Bai Ziho started to offer to take the food, since his brother already worked hard studying. But he figured Bai Zipei had his own reasons, so he kept quiet. Bai Ruozhu watched her brother go, then glanced at the old lady, clearly annoyed. Something was up, she thought, grabbing another piece of meat. The old lady glared at her like she was stealing food from her mouth. Hilarious. Could the old lady even finish the whole table? This was her home. Did she need permission to eat? Besides, she cooked everything. Did the old lady even care what she wanted? Finally, the old lady snapped, Ruozhu, you're old enough now. Don't just eat. Offer some to the guests. Rangier looked at the old lady, wide-eyed. Grandma Bai, my sister's been giving me food. I have plenty. The old lady felt completely embarrassed, but couldn't argue with a kid. She had to swallow her anger. Bai Yihong was mortified. He respected his mother, but also felt bad for his daughter. She'd done nothing wrong, yet his mother had just called her greedy in front of guests. It wasn't a good look. If Ruozhu was still single, such a comment could ruin her chances, painting her as lazy at eating and unable to have children. Mom, Bai Yihong said, Ruozhu made all these dishes. The old lady looked surprised. She thought the food was too good for Lin to have made it, so she'd assumed Zhang's daughter-in-law was responsible. She never imagined Ruozhu had cooked everything. Wang spat out some bones. Well, Ruozhu's really clever. If she wasn't a widow, she'd snag a great husband. She laughed like a fool. She was deliberately trying to hurt Lin Ping'er. Wang's second daughter, Bai Ruolin, was a few months older than Ruozhu. People had been talking about their marriages for years, but Ruolin still wasn't married. She wasn't as pretty as Ruozhu. She felt she was too good for many men because her grandfather was a scholar, her father a student, and her older sister had married well in town. So, she had been waiting. Roland blamed Ruozhu's scandalous broken engagement for messing up her own chances. Wang, not a reasonable woman, agreed. Ruozhu knew what Wang was thinking and smiled sweetly. Thank you, auntie. Wang was momentarily stunned by Ruozhu's smile. Ruozhu was always pretty, but now, even plumper, she was downright captivating. Wang was jolted back to reality, consumed by jealousy and rage. Before Wang could say anything, the courtyard door swung open and Erlang's voice cut through the air. Dad, Mom, Grandpa's here. Bai Ruozhu escorted the old man in. The old man walked quickly, his face grim. But when he saw Zhang Liliang, he smiled. I was just reading that Confucius said, a friend from afar is a joy. So, I decided to join the fun. Zhang Liliang stood and bowed. It's an honor, Mr. Bai. Just call me Liliang. Everyone greeted Mr. Bai and offered him a seat. Lin Pinger went to get him dishes. Erlang gave her a reassuring look. She smiled. That kid was already exhausted from studying, and still worried about everyone else. By the time Lin Pinger returned with the bowls and chopsticks, the old man was deep in conversation with Zhang Liliang. The old lady and Wang sat up straight, no longer reaching for food. Unfortunately, they had already ruined most of the dishes, grabbing the meat and turning everything over and over with their chopsticks, making everything unappetizing. Fortunately, the old man had brought back the food Bai Ruozhu had taken to him. He told Bai Ruozhu to add it to the table, so he could eat and drink with Zhang Liliang and Bai Yihong. The men stayed behind drinking, while the women cleared the table. The old lady didn't want to move, but the old man glared at her. Go help clean up. Get out of our sight. Reluctantly, the old lady stood, glaring at Erlang, who ignored her. Bai Ruozhu left the main room. She couldn't hide, so she grabbed a stool and sat in the courtyard. She was exhausted from cooking all day. She saw the old lady heading for the cart of gifts. Probably checking to see what she could steal. Ruozhu frowned. To start pawing at the gifts before the guests even left. Rude. She couldn't help herself. Grandma, what are you looking for? That the old lady flinched, then shrieked, Mom. Ruozhu saw the old lady's hand was bleeding. She'd been scratched by something. Chapter 67 Unfilial Descendants. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The old woman's yell startled Bai Ruozhu, who was standing closest to her. She immediately noticed a gash on the old woman's finger. It was bleeding, but it didn't look too bad, just a superficial cut. Bai Ruozhu saw it was from the hook used to hang bacon and sausages on the cart. The old woman probably felt guilty, because when Bai Ruozhu had called out to her, she'd pulled her up without thinking, likely causing the injury. Either way, she was still Bai Ruozhu's grandma, and being the closest, Bai Ruozhu had no choice. She grabbed a handkerchief and went over, asking, Grandma, are you okay? Let's get that wrapped up. She reached out with the clean handkerchief, but the old woman turned and glared, snapping, You jinx. You're trying to kill me. Get away. Then she shoved Bai Ruozhu hard. Neither Bai Ruozhu nor I expected the sudden attack, and she couldn't dodge. She stumbled backward, almost falling on her, but, luckily, Lin Pinger and Ronger's mom in the yard had heard the commotion. Lin Pinger rushed over and caught her daughter, preventing Bai Ruozhu from hitting the ground. Even so, Bai Ruozhu's back was soaked with cold sweat. A hard fall like that, and she could have gone into premature labor. Lin Pinger, supporting her daughter, was furious. She yelled at the old woman, Mom, what are you doing? Ruozhu is your own granddaughter. How can you push her like that, especially with her being so pregnant? That the old woman ignored Lin Pinger. She clutched her wounded hand with her other hand and kept ranting, What's wrong with pushing her? She's a jinx trying to kill her own grandma. Giving me this big hole. That's unfilial. She deserves punishment, and a little push is letting her off easy. She glared at Bai Ruozhu. You're a money pit. Your father lives off your family's charity. You're supposed to find a husband to support you, but nobody wants you, so you leech off your parents. You've drained all my money, and now you're having a baby, just another mouth to feed, another body living here for free. And now you're trying to hurt me. Bai Ruozhu was shaken, and didn't want to deal with the crazy old woman, but hearing herself being insulted like that, she couldn't hold back. She put a hand on her waist, looked at the old woman, and said, "Grandma, have a little conscience. You were messing around with the customer's cart yourself. Did I even touch you? How am I responsible for you scratching your hand?" That she wasn't in the mood to argue right now, especially with guests at home. The old woman liked to embarrass people, and she wasn't about to let her embarrass this one. Everyone inside had heard the commotion and came out. Bai Yihong's eyes were red, hearing his mother scolding his daughter. He wanted to shout that his daughter didn't live there for free, that she earned all the money in the family. They were all living off her. But Bai Ruozhu had told him not to say anything, so he held his tongue. Mr. Bai, a man who cared about appearances, glanced at Zhang Liliang, feeling humiliated. He snapped at the old woman, "What's all this fuss about? If you're hurt, go home and bandage it up." Seeing that her husband wasn't taking her side, the old woman sat on the ground and burst into tears. Wailing that she was unlucky, that her son was unfilial, and her granddaughter was trying to kill her. She screamed loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. Bai Ruozhu sneered inwardly, watching Mr. Bai. She saw the veins throbbing on his forehead. He was really angry. Sure enough, the old man started coughing violently, nearly hacking up a lung. The old woman didn't dare to push it. If he got really sick, her life would be miserable. He finally caught his breath, took a few sips of warm water his eldest grandson brought, and then said to Zhang Liliang, "Liliang, I'm not feeling well. I'm going home. You and Yihong go ahead and finish up. Don't mind me." Zhang Liliang offered to help him. "How about I take you back?" Mr. Bai waved him off. "Don't be ridiculous, I can't trouble my guests. I'm feeling much better. Just have my wife help me." He glanced at the old woman, with her hair a mess and her face covered in snot and tears. Thinking about having to politely call her ma'am made him even more embarrassed. Finally, he glared at the old woman and Mr. Wang and said, "Stop hanging around here. Come home with me." He stormed out of the yard, the old woman and Mr. Wang hurrying after him. Even then, she still managed to turn and glare at Bai Ruozhu. Once they were outside, the old woman started crying even louder, putting on a show. Her crying attracted the neighbors. Some were watching from outside, noticing the blood on her hands and the tear-streaked mess on her face. She looked like she'd been beaten. The Bai family followed them to the gate but didn't go out. Bai Ruozhu could still see what was happening through the crack in the door. The old woman, who had just been glaring daggers at her, was now whimpering softly. Her acting skills were impressive. A curious neighbor asked, "Hey, Mrs. Bai, what happened? How did you get hurt?" The old woman cried even harder, mumbling, "My children and grandchildren are so unfilial." Mr. Bai paused, turned to glare at her, but didn't stop to explain. Bai Ruozhu felt a chill in her heart. Mr. Bai cared about his reputation and didn't want to admit he couldn't control his wife in front of everyone. But their family was taking the blame for it. After they left, Zhang Liliang gave Bai Yihong an apologetic smile. "Brother, I'm sorry I caused so much trouble." Bai Yihong waved his hand. "It's not your fault. It's hard to keep the peace at home. Don't even worry about it." Zhang Liliang nodded, saying nothing more. Everyone turned to Bai Ruozhu, asking if she was hurt. Bai Ruozhu shook her head. "I'm fine. Luckily, Mom caught me." Lin Ping'er took her daughter's arm and whispered, "Don't let anything your grandma said get to you. She's always been like this." Bai Ruozhu smiled at her mother. "If I worried about everything she said, I'd drive myself crazy." Zhang Liliang and his wife felt awkward, so they said their goodbyes, and then quickly unloaded all their gifts from the cart. Bai Yihong tried to talk them out of it, but they insisted on giving everything to the Bai family. Once the cart was empty, Romer climbed in and sat down. She smiled sweetly at Bai Ruozhu and waved. Sister, I'm leaving now. If you come to town, come visit me at the West Market, okay? Bai Ruozhu was cheered up by Ronger's innocent smile. She smiled back and said, okay, and I'll buy you some candied hawthorns. Ronger giggled. Okay, it's a deal, that I'd like to apologize to everyone. I'm currently packing and moving from one city to another, so it's been extra troublesome. So yesterday, please whip me with a small whip. Can you just slap me on the back? Face, please be a little gentler, this state will end soon. I promise you that after the move is completed, I will work hard to update. After it is put on the shelves, there will be 3 updates a day, so believe me, the products are still very good. Drop. Chapter 68 The Zhang Family's Kindness. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After the Zhangs left, the Bays came inside, feeling a bit down. If we complain, we'll get a reputation for being bad kids, Lin Ping'er muttered. Bai Ruozhu perked up. No way, they can't get away with that. Grandpa's just old and out of it, only cares about appearances. Grandma's stirring the pot, making it look like mom's not respectful. What if someone uses that against second brother later, that she didn't know much about this Danliang kingdom, but second brother said the new emperor Wu Ning was young and big on filial piety. All the officials were following his lead. She glanced at her brother, but his expression was calm, like he didn't care. He's got that scholar's pride, thinks doing the right thing is enough, but Bai Ruozhu wasn't about to let anyone in her family get hurt. Second brother had studied his tail off for years, and this shouldn't mess up his future. This was supposed to be a good thing, but grandma got too greedy. Bai Ruozhu sighed, then turned to her parents. Give half the thank you gifts from the Zhangs to grandpa and grandma. The whole family stared, surprised. It wasn't that the Bays were cheap, it was just that after grandma's stunt, nobody felt like giving anything. Even Bai Yihong frowned. Even if we send it now, they probably won't appreciate it, right? Her dad was smart, but when it came to family, he went soft. I was always going to give them something. Whether I like them or not, being a good kid is another thing. Even if I don't, I have to do my duty. We just have to be smart about how we give these gifts, not just hand them over for nothing. Back in college, Bai Ruozhu had a friend who got married early. She used to talk about dealing with her mother-in-law. She said she couldn't stand her, but she still bought her what she needed, made sure she had gifts for the holidays. She said she didn't care about the money, she just wanted a clear conscience. Same deal with the old house. Bai Ruozhu wasn't going to give away the farm, but she'd still show respect where it was due, just repaying her parents and keeping anyone from using this as an excuse to start trouble. The nurse's hand was bleeding when she left. Whatever we give should smooth things over, Lin Ping'er said, shooting Bai Yihong a look. As they were talking, someone knocked at the gate. Ruozhu, can I see you? It was Fang Guizhi. Bai Ruozhu hurried to open the door. Fang Guizhi came in and lowered his voice. Right after your folks left, I bought some tofu, a couple of fish, and a jug of wine and took it to your grandpa's. Huh? Bai Ruozhu was stunned. The Zhangs hadn't said a word when they left, like they were afraid of getting involved. Outside the Bai's old place, the Zhangs were knocking on the door. Zhang Liliang yelled, Mrs. Bai, I'm here to say I'm sorry. Grandpa was sulking inside, but Wang saw Zhang Liliang carrying something through the crack and rushed to open the door. Hey, no need to be so polite. Come on in. Wang's attitude was all smiles when she saw what Zhang Liliang had. Zhang Liliang waved his hand. I just came to apologize. I have to get back, so I won't come in. He spoke loudly, drawing the attention of the neighbors. Hearing the commotion, Mrs. Bai came to the door. Why are you apologizing? You're not bothering me, she said, her eyes glued to the things in his hand. Zhang Liliang handed them over. This is for you. My cart had a hook sticking out, and you scratched your hand on it. I'm real sorry. Old Mrs. Bai's finger was bandaged, and the bleeding had stopped a while ago. It's nothing, nothing at all. Just a little scratch. Why don't you come in and have some dinner? That she didn't sound like she really meant it. Zhang Liliang bowed to Mrs. Bai. Thank you, but I have to get back. I'll come back another day to apologize. Then he left with his family. When Mr. Bai got to the gate, he saw that they were gone, and the old lady was carrying a pile of stuff. The old man's face was twisted. Get everyone inside. He snapped, then stormed back into the house. Nobody saw the old lady that day, but the neighbors started talking. Everyone knew Bai Ruozhu had saved the Zhang's baby. The Zhangs brought gifts to thank her, but what was up with Mrs. Bai scratching her hand on their cart? Was she trying to grab their stuff before they left? When the Bai Ruozhu family heard about the Zhang's gesture, they were grateful. Bai Yihong said he'd thank Zhang Liliang when he got a chance. That evening, Bai Ziho and Bai Zipei brought a bunch of stuff to the old house. People saw them and asked what was going on. Bai Ziho smiled. We got some things, so we're honoring our grandparents, like we always do. The Zhangs were here, but Mom hurt her hand, so we had to bring it over later. Bai Zipei was quiet, but he threw in a comment here and there. Adding that to what the Zhangs had said at the old house, and what people knew about old Mrs. Bai, the whole story came out. Nobody said anything about the second Mrs. Bai being unfilial, they just praised the Bai kids for turning out so well. A few days later, Lin Pinger and Bai Yihong decided to build a room in the yard. The oldest son was married, and the house was too small. They couldn't use the daughter's room for the baby and the postpartum confinement. The two sons were sharing a room, and if they turned it into a bridal room, where would the second son do his studying? So, adding a room was a must. They decided to add it behind the main house, since the backyard was open. After that, they'd build a new house for the oldest son so his wife could be more comfortable. Just as they were talking about it, Mrs. Wang showed up with some news. Wang lady was out of jail. Chapter 69. Whose child is it? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Bai Ruozhu's mother wasn't a fan of Granny Wang. So, when she heard she'd come over to dish about Wang lady, she played it cool, saying, well, at least she's still locked up. Her family can get her out if they pay the fine. Mrs. Wang scoffed, who's gonna pay for her? If someone was willing, she'd be out by now. Why would they wait? Bai Ruozhu couldn't help but perk up her ears, sensing things were about to get interesting. The Lu family wants nothing to do with her. And the Chao family? They're furious and their business is tanking. I hear Chao's wife is a real firecracker. She went to Wang lady's mom and caused a scene, almost a full-on brawl. Wang lady's own family is so embarrassed, they're pretending she doesn't exist, Mrs. Wang said, practically beaming. She was probably thinking Wang lady had it coming for picking a fight with her. Bai Ruozhu settled back in her chair. She was feeling every bit of her weight, and the wooden chair was just plain uncomfortable. She longed for the sofa from her old life. After shifting around to find a somewhat comfortable position, she looked at Mrs. Wang and said, cut the theatrics and spill the beans. Mrs. Wang was thrilled someone was actually interested. Her smile deepened the wrinkles around her eyes. I got a friend who works at the courthouse. Word is, she's pregnant, and the judge felt sorry for her, so he's letting her go. Fine waved and everything. Not only was Bai Ruozhu surprised, but even Lin Pinger perked up. She stared at Mrs. Wang and asked, how'd they find out she's pregnant? Is it Lu's kid? Bai Ruozhu frowned. Knowing Wang lady was pregnant might have made her feel more forgiving. After all, she was going to be a mother herself. It's just that Wang lady crossed the line. If she hadn't fought back, both she and her baby would be suffering. Mrs. Wang cackled, revealing her stained teeth. Who knows? She probably doesn't even know who the daddy is. She's really messed up the Chao family. Their business is probably done for. Chao's daughter-in-law is threatening to leave him. Bai Ruozhu and her mother exchanged a look, both finding the situation appalling. They fell silent. Mrs. Wang pursed her lips, thinking the Bai women were acting too proper. They've already had kids, what is there to be ashamed of? Finding their lack of response boring, she slapped her thighs and left. After she was gone, Lin Ping'er sighed, honestly, Mrs. Wang needs to learn some tact. Girls shouldn't be talking about such things. Bai Ruozhu burst out laughing, pointing to her watermelon-sized belly. Mom, look at me. What's the point of acting like a blushing maiden? Lin Ping'er couldn't help but chuckle. She still hadn't gotten used to her daughter being a woman. The truth was, Bai Ruozhu had never really been married. She hid the disappointment in her heart, not wanting to upset her daughter. Smiling gently, she said, "You'll always be my little girl, no matter what." Bai Ruozhu went over and hooked her arm through her mother's, acting like a child. "That's right. I'm gonna depend on you two for the rest of my life. You can't get rid of me." Lin Ping'er's face clouded over. She wasn't sure what her daughter meant. If the immortal never came back, would her daughter be a widow forever? The thought was unbearable. Bai Ruozhu wasn't really counting on immortality returning, but she didn't want her parents setting her up with some suitable replacement either. Being a modern woman, she couldn't accept a loveless marriage. Even after marriage, she would not accept a loveless marriage. She couldn't help but recall what Mrs. Wang had said about Chow's daughter-in-law threatening divorce. So, divorce was actually possible in this era. She saw a glimmer of hope. If the immortal never showed, so what if she was a widow? But if he did suddenly reappear, she'd find a way to get a divorce. That was emotional baggage from another lifetime, and she wasn't about to carry it for someone else, even if he was the father of her child. At lunchtime, Bai Ruozhu was snoozing in a wicker chair when her father returned from the fields and woke her up with a smile. "Honey, after lunch, go back to the house and get some real rest." Bai Ruozhu felt a pang of guilt, lounging around like this in someone else's house, especially so close to her due date. She was incredibly lucky. She tried to get up from the wicker chair, but her belly made it impossible. Her father chuckled and helped her to her feet. "Your mother was the same way when she was pregnant with your older brother. She couldn't get up once she sat down. I had to pull her up every time. One time I wasn't around, she struggled for half an hour and your grandma scolded her for it." Bai Yihong said with a smile, but the smile quickly faded. He'd only meant to tease his daughter, but mentioning his late mother brought back painful memories. Bai Ruozhu sensed her father's mood and pretended not to notice. She stood up and walked around the yard. "I'll be able to get up next time if I roll onto my side. Dad, go relax inside. I need to move around a bit." Her body was feeling heavier every day, and she really just wanted to collapse, but she knew that if she got lazy now, she could be putting her life in danger. She had to work hard for her baby's sake, even if she wasn't doing it for herself. Bai Yihong chuckled and went inside to have some tea. Bai Ruozhu began her walk around the small yard. Soon, her older brother returned from chopping firewood in the back hills. Lin Ping'er called for her second brother, who was busy studying, announcing that lunch was ready. Bai Ruozhu was about to go inside when she heard Fang Guizhi's voice from outside. "Ruozhu, I need to talk to you." Bai Ruozhu quickly opened the door and saw Fang Guizhi, breathless, her face flushed, and sweat beading on her forehead. Despite the apparent urgency, she was smiling, so it probably wasn't anything terrible. Fang Guizhi lowered her voice and whispered in Bai Ruozhu's ear, "Wang lady is causing a ruckus in front of the Lu house. She's claiming she's pregnant with Lu San's kid, but the Lu family is denying it. She's bawling and screaming. Wanna go watch the show?" Wang lady didn't waste any time. She must have been afraid of having nowhere to go, so she went straight to the Lu's after getting out of jail. Wang lady had it pretty good in the Lu family before. Lu San adored his wife, so this was a huge fall from grace. Bai Ruozhu thought about the innocent little life growing inside Wang lady and shook her head. "I'm too far along to be joining any crowds. Just fill me in later." Fang Guizhi nodded. "You're right. You should stay away from crowded places. I'll tell you all about it later. With that, she dashed off, clearly eager to witness the drama. Bai Ruozhu smiled wryly and shook her head. It wasn't that Fang Guizhi was heartless, it was just normal for a young girl to be curious about a spectacle. Lin Pinger had heard Fang Guizhi's voice and came out of the kitchen, but saw no one. She asked what was going on. Bai Ruozhu explained why Fang Guizhi had come. Lin Pinger was taken aback. The Lu family is very concerned about appearances. Don't go stirring up any trouble. Chapter 70. You shouldn't wade into troubled waters. You are listening at novelfull.audio. A crowd gathered outside the Lu family's gate in Haoshan village, eager for some drama. Wang Lady, the former daughter-in-law of the Lu family's third son, was there, sobbing and pleading, tears and snot running down her face, which tugged at the heartstrings of a few softer onlookers. The baby inside me is definitely a Lu. Is the Lu family just going to let their own flesh and blood die? Wang Lady wailed, resorting to threats when the old woman of the Lu family refused to let her in. The old lady was already in a foul mood. She was getting old and didn't want to deal with such a scandalous situation, but her oldest daughter-in-law wouldn't step up. It was a real inconvenience, but with so many gawkers around, she had no choice but to handle it herself. She scoffed, her face like thunder. Who knows whose kid that is? Besides, the Lu family wouldn't want a low-life mother like you. Just then, Wang Lady's son, fathered by Lu San, started crying. He was too young to understand anything, just that he hadn't seen his mother in days. He wanted a hug, but the adults in the courtyard wouldn't let him out. Wang Lady caught a glimpse of her son through the crack in the gate, and her tears flowed even faster. The onlookers couldn't bear to see the mother and son so heartbroken. One sympathetic mother-in-law piped up, maybe it really is a Lu family baby. Can't you let her have the baby inside? Old Mrs. Lu's face darkened. Easy for outsiders to say, but what if it was Chow's son? The Lu family would be the laughingstock of the village for raising another man's child. The thought gave her pause. She eyed the crying child in the yard, a seed of doubt planted. Could this be Chow's? Unfortunately, the child was too young, his features hadn't fully developed, so it was impossible to tell who he resembled. Wang Lady was a mess, a far cry from her former proud self. But more than anything, she was reeling from the recent blow. In prison, she'd learned that her in-laws had disowned her. They hadn't paid her fine or even visited. So, the moment she got out, she'd gone to see her cousin, Chow Lisheng, who used to swear he was crazy about her. She didn't even make it inside the Chow house. Her aunt had never liked her, and after this scandal, the Chow family, already struggling, had kicked her out like garbage. Desperate, she'd started claiming she was pregnant with Chow Lisheng's child, just to get him to see her. Chow Lisheng was having a rough time. He was relying on his wife's family for support, but his wife was threatening divorce, so he was groveling daily. Just when he thought he was making progress, Wang Lady showed up at his door. Chow Lisheng didn't believe for a second that the child was his. He stormed out, slapped Wang Lady across the face, and yelled, "You bitch, you're here to ruin me. Get away from me. How could that thing inside you be mine? I wouldn't let trash like you have my baby." Wang Lady was stunned, her ears ringing. She heard him clearly. Then Chow Lisheng turned around and went back inside, slamming the door in her face. She cried outside Chow's house for hours before finally giving up. She couldn't go back to her parents, and the Chow family was definitely out. That left the Lu family. She thought of her kind, quiet husband, Lu San, who always blushed when he saw her, and decided there might be a glimmer of hope. Now, as she thought of Lu San, she was sorry that she had been making trouble outside Lu's house for a long time without seeing Lu San's face. She listened and listened. Lu San wanted to rush out from the house, but was stopped by his brother at home. Pressed. She cried and begged, swearing that the child was really a Lu. But Mrs. Lu wouldn't budge. "Get out of here," she snapped. "Don't even think about stepping foot in my Lu family's house." The more Wang Lady thought about it, the more hopeless she felt. Finally, she turned fierce. Fine. But don't regret this. If you won't recognize the baby, then I'll die with it right here in front of your house. You can watch us die before we're even born. Old Mrs. Lu was just as stubborn. She sneered, it's barely a thing this month. Who are you trying to scare? Our Lu family has plenty of men. We don't want a bastard like you. Some of the older onlookers tried to reason with her, worried someone would get hurt. Then they saw one lady trying to throw herself against the Lu family's gate, and several women rushed over to stop her. Lady, don't be impulsive. You need to think about the baby. Old Mrs. Li, white-haired and soft-hearted, pulled Wang Lady back. Wang Lady's intentions were uncertain. Maybe she was really trying to kill herself, or maybe she was just putting on a show. But old Mrs. Li was frail and unsteady. As she pulled Wang Lady, she twisted her ankle and cried out, collapsing to the ground. In falling, she lost her grip on Wang Lady and accidentally bumped into another woman. Focused on helping Mrs. Li, also let go of Wang Lady. Just when everyone thought the danger had passed, Wang Lady stumbled and crashed headfirst into the Lu family's courtyard gate. Her head split open, and she bounced backward, landing on top of old Mrs. Li, who groaned and couldn't get up. Fan Guizhi ran to tell Bai Ruozhu's family the news, and they all felt a pang of sadness. Ruozhu, thank goodness you didn't go. It was terrifying. Wang Lady hurt herself badly. Someone went for Dr. Li, but I heard some of the women saying the baby might not make it. Fan Guizhi trailed off, not wanting to say the words out loud. Bai Ruozhu couldn't stay seated. She stood up and said, I have to go see. Her mother grabbed her arm, worried. What are you going to see? You're pregnant. Don't scare the baby. Mom, the baby is innocent. I might have a way to save it. If I don't go, I won't be able to live with myself. Bai Ruozhu shook her mother's arm, a touch of playfulness in her voice. You're not a doctor. What can you do? Lin Ping'er glared at her daughter, then remembered how her daughter had saved Shi Dan'er from drowning, and hesitated. The whole family looked at Bai Ruozhu. Bai Ruozhu felt she shouldn't get involved, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she had to do something, probably because she was going to be a mother herself, and hated the thought of an innocent child dying. Bai Ruozhu thought for a moment and said, I don't know how to save people. I just dreamed one night that an immortal with a white beard patted me on the head, and suddenly I knew how to treat people. It just popped into my head.